Hey guys, thanks for coming by and taking a look at my next video in my programs featurette. This one is another C# program that I wrote. This one wasn't for a class or anything. It was just kind of like a little fun to do on the side. This is a random ID generator, and essentially what it does is it does exactly what it says. It generates a random ID for a bunch of things. So what it'll create a hash table. It will, in that hash table, fill it with a bunch of stuff, a bunch of random things, and then it will allow you to delete all those things and then fill it up again. And while the hash table itself isn't necessarily the main feature of this application, it is the ID generate class that I have over here, which I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail. But for right now, let's just jump in and take a look and see what it does. So as you can see, kind of a generic menu going on here, just a simple console type menu. The first thing you need to do is create a table, and it'll let you know that a hash table is created successfully, and then just simply add things. Now the things, as we'll see in a little bit, are really simple. They're just basically items, or I should say objects with IDs. And then they also have a random like number that goes along with them for identifying purposes. Now if I print all the things, there you go. You see every single one of the things that I just generated with its ID and then its random number here. And then in the application, I can also destroy the table, which doesn't really destroy it, it just clears it. And then I can add things to the table again. And when I print those, you'll see that the original things are gone and the new things are here in their place instead. And you can just continue to add things to the table as much as you want, and then print them out and marvel at all of the things in the table. So cool. So anyway, so let's take a look at the actual meat and potatoes of this program itself. Let's exit. All right, so as I mentioned before, the program itself, the hash table isn't really the main focus of this, but I use the hash table because in C# hash tables kind of give you the opportunity to fill it with whatever key you want to use to look up the item that you're storing in it. So if you take a look here, this t.add shows the adding something to a hash table function. And this first parameter here that I pass in is going to be the key, and then this will be the actual thing. Now the thing in this case is an object of type thing, as you can see right here. And then the thing itself has an ID shown here in private, and you can get that ID with this method right here. It just returns it. So coming back to the table here, what I've done is it takes the object, gets its ID, and it puts that ID as the key, and then it puts the thing in with that ID into the table. So if I want to look up this particular thing, I just need to know its ID and look it up via ID, which I prefer, to be honest. I know that hash tables in C# give you a lot of freedom in how you choose what type of key you can put in here. It can be just integers, it can be doubles, it can be strings, and all kinds of other stuff. But when you're dealing with users, you might know that users tend to, I don't want to say they break everything, but they definitely break everything. And if you give them the opportunity to just pick whatever key they want, you end up with a hash table with a whole mishmash of weird things. And then you also have the chance of having collisions taking place, like if you're putting in people as inputs into the hash table, and you're using maybe their last name as the key, so you can look them up by last name later on. Well, what happens if you have two people with the same last name? Well, now you've got two keys that both point to well, you've got two keys that are both the same, but they're supposed to point to two different things. That's not going to really work too well. So what I found was a solution, at least what I consider a good solution, where it generates a random ID instead, a random string ID, and then that random string ID can be looked up later on if necessary. So let's take a look at how that's created. So again, taking a look here at this add thing method after I've created a table, when adding a thing, it's going to create an ID that's going to act as uh, the the key in just a minute. When I make that ID, I'm going to use this generate ID class and its generate unique ID method. So let's take a look at that and what that looks like. So here in the generate ID class, the first thing it's going to do is look at the generate unique ID method, and inside that method, it's going to look to see if a pool has been created. If the pool has not been created, i.e. it's null, it's going to come up here first to generate pool. And in the generate pool method, what I have is a string, or a string array, which is called pool, and that pool contains all the possible characters that I want to use for an ID. So it's got the lowercase, uppercase, alphabet characters. It's got numbers in here, and I think this one might have special characters, but I'm not 100% sure. But it can be added in there if you want to. Any characters that can be read by C# can be added in here, or any ASCII characters at least can be added in here. So you can have all kinds of interesting characters in your pool, but I prefer to just stick with like stuff that can be typed on a keyboard. So I think it is just uppercase, lowercase letters, and numbers, nothing more than that. But special characters can be added in there if you want. Now, once the pool has been generated, then to make an ID, all this program does is it creates a random number, and then in a for loop that lasts the size of the ID specified. So in this case, the ID is supposed to be 10 characters long. In this for loop, that'll loop for 10 times, it will generate the next random number. It'll find that random number's index in the pool. It'll pick out the character that's at that index and then simply add it to the S string that I've created up here. Once I've done that 10 times, and it just keeps concatenating the next random character generated from the pool, once it's done that 10 times, then it'll just simply return that string. And when it returns that string here to the add thing, this while loop here checks to see that that string does not have any collisions anywhere else within the table. So the way it does that is first it looks in the table to see if it contains that ID. If it does, then it will jump into the loop and it will generate a new ID. If it does not contain that ID, and the number IDs, the total maximum number IDs that can be created from the pool has not been reached, then it will move on to this next portion here, and it will add that thing with its ID as its key. Now, this portion right here, the generate ID get max entries, that's just there to kind of like make sure that it doesn't get stuck in this constant trying to generate stuff, finds it in the table, let's try and generate it again. If it finds that it has generated every single possible key via this, then it will exit the loop because it'll be like, well, I can't do it. So once this condition has been met, then this will be created and it will be used as the key for the hash table. And then the thing itself will be stored in there. And that's it. That's the whole thing. Now I'm sure there's probably a better way to do that. And honestly, that this loop will probably go on for a really long time if you've got a lot of entries in that table. And that's obviously not a good thing. But for the most part, any additional checks and balances can be added in here. I didn't add those in just because I was dealing with such small amounts and small numbers, but those can be added in obviously by whoever decides to use this, if anyone wants to. Again, this program, just like all my others, can be found on my GitHub in a public repository that is called C# Utilities or CS Utilities. So feel free to download it and take a look at it, and kind of get an idea for how hash tables work too, if you're not really sure. Hash tables in C# is a really cool, easy thing to do. It's very similar to hash tables in Java, and it is not anything like hash tables in C++. So if you are familiar with C++ hash tables and you don't like them, or you just find that they're really complicated, hash tables in C# are much, much easier. The program itself, the compiler will just, it basically handles it all for you, which is really cool. So anyways, that is my random ID generator. Oh, and one other thing, you may have noticed that when I boot this up, I've got this kind of very generic looking menu going on here, which I'm not a huge fan of all the time. In most of my other softwares, my other console applications that I make, I like to use a more interactive menu. So in a future video, I'm going to actually make a video showing how to turn this into a more interactive, using the arrows up and down and enter keys on the keyboard menu, instead of having to type in these numbers like this. And I'm going to show how to do that with the menu C# utility that I also have included in the C# utilities repository on my GitHub. So anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.